Year 11. This is a podcast on using alarm with Brave New World and with what we're required to do in the exams. Some of you came and saw me today saying that you're a bit confused as to what's required and how to approach the question and how to actually use alarm. The question itself, I'm not going to analyse the question in this, but you need to note that it is there's three parts to it. One is the actual quote itself that starts the question, that everyone belongs to everybody else. And then it asks you the idea of that quote is represented through more than one critical lens. So what you do have to work out is what is the idea that is being conveyed in that quote, and then how is it represented. One of the things we have to do is break down the question. I've got here a list of the Bostes verbs for the HSC, or the NESA verbs, and what we have to look for is where does how come into it, because the question itself doesn't actually use a verb. So we have to look at what it is it's asking us to do. And you'll see here we have compare, show how, and here we've got contrast, show how. Now this is where how comes into it. So it's really asking us to compare and contrast. So that's the first thing that you have to understand. It's asking you to look at it in terms of lenses, so plural. So really compare and contrast how those lenses explore the idea, whatever the idea is that you interpret the quote to be about. You've then asked for today how to go through it to do an alarm paragraph. So what I've done, I've written an alarm template, and I'm going to upload this onto Google Classroom for you, to read alongside listening to this podcast. So you can slow it down and actually read what's written. Now, I'm going to show you what's done well in this and what's done poorly. You have to understand that when I'm filling out my alarm template, this is to formulate my ideas to start off with. This is before I get to the written stage for my paragraph. One of the things that you will notice is, if I just move this screen around a bit, you're going to see just here, down here, 724 words. So my alarm template, my alarm matrix filled out, is almost an essay in itself. So that's the first problem. It's too big. But it has allowed me to formulate my ideas, and you'll see by the time I get to the bottom of it, I've got a fairly good point of where I'm wanting to go. The other thing I've done is I've used a different theory or critical lens to what you have to use for the exam, so that no one gets an unfair advantage in this process. So I have done it through a deconstructionist reading. So this is looking at what the lenses are themselves, and how I would explore that lens with the quote. So in my identify and define, I've started off with what is the lens. So here, a deconstructionist reading, and then I've explored what the lens requires me to do. So in my identify and define. So a deconstructionist reading of a text involves removing the privilege from the precept in binary opposition, so that we reposition what is subordinated by the text and determine what is being culturally affirmed or challenged. That's my definition of the lens. And then I define it in terms of Huxley's Brave New World. To be able to read Huxley's Brave New World through this lens, it is necessary to understand how the text uses binary oppositions to position the other, which is elaborating on this first sentence up here. John Savage is positioned as other from two societies. So now I'm drilling down a bit and getting a little bit more specific. So it's not just about the other generally, it's now who is other. He's other to the world state due to his failure to be part of the system that requires everyone to belongs to everyone else. So I've got my quote in there. And yet, as the child of two world state parents, he becomes other to the society of Malpais. Okay, so that's by identify and define. It's quite long. some of that I would ultimately maybe move up into the introduction or something later on. As I said, this is purely getting my ideas down into the alarm matrix to work out what it is I want to say, because that was what the question was today. When some of you came and saw me, is how do you actually do this alarm template? Okay, now describe and explain. This is the techniques. You'll notice that I have merged the cells here because I've kind of done the two together. And if I had time, I would go back and I would actually completely rewrite this. The reason is, and you're going to see why. So I now start to talk about what is it that I'm seeing and hearing, what is the structure of techniques, language forms and features and so on, and what is their purpose and effect. I combine the two because what I prefer to do is write T sentences where I have the technique and the example, which is describe, and then I have the effect, which is the explain here. So I have Huxley positions these two societies as other to each society. The world state defines Malpais as a savage reservation from which there is no escape. It is occupied by savages who preserve their repulsive habits and customs. Notice how I'm blending my quotes in to the sentence. So I never use the words in the quote. The quote becomes part of the sentence so that it's syntactically correct. It is grammatically correct. The repetitive use of the term. So now here, this is, firstly, it's a really long sentence when I look at it like that, but this is a T sentence. So the repetitive use of the term, so that's my technique. The repetitive use of the term savage, my evidence, to define Malpais along with the otherness discourse. So I've got a second technique in there, discourse such as savagery versus civilization, repulsive, beastly. So I'm putting in all my evidence to go with the technique. Even the notion that savages can be tamed, another piece of evidence, suggests that Malpais is both a symbol of the wild and nature as well as being the subordinate binary opposite to the precept of the world state. So we're talking about T sentences. So this is a T sentence that the quote, evidence, and the analysis of it, the effect of it. Now, other things that you want to be doing in critical writing, and remember we said compare, contrast. So you're going to need linking words such as however. This is straight away going, I'm going to argue the other side. So let's get those 2 points of the argument in there. However, the residents of Malpais defined the world state as the other place. So now we've got more quotes. And the Fordians as unnatural. Now we're going to another T sentence. The juxtaposition in the other creates a conflict in the idea of who is the other. Arguably though, so then again, I'm now arguing the other side once more. So I've got my linking word here. Arguably though, it is John Savage himself that is other to both worlds. If both Malpais and the world state are the precept, so now I'm getting a bit more analysis in there. If both Malpais and the world state are the precept, it is John that becomes the subordinate. And what I'm doing here in this sentence is I'm chiming what I've got written up here in my identify and define. So I'm constantly staying on track with what it is that I'm exploring in my alarm paragraph. To the Malpais occupants, and now I've got another quote, he's disliked his complexion. Oh, that's wrong. That should probably be to the Malpais occupants, John is disliked due to his complexion. Now see here, I've got these square brackets. This is to show that I'm playing around with the quote and I'm adding words in here. So I've added in the D there. Oops, sorry, this D. And then I've added in due to his complexion, and I've taken something out. Whilst to the Fordians he was a metaphorical carp in unorthodoxy. As such, to both he is other. So there's my T sentences, my evidence, and my analysis. Or my explanation of the purpose of those particular pieces of evidence. Now, what I haven't done is I don't have the mood, the tone, the feeling, or the atmosphere created that we've got here. So that's something that I'm missing from it. And I would have to go back when I'm tidying this up and actually turn it into a paragraph to add in. Now, our analyze is about the how and the why, which is really important because your question is a how question. What is the impact on the relationships? Is it positive or negative? How does it position the audience? So you'll see here I've got as a deconstructionist reading. So again, a deconstructionist reading, I'm chiming my lens. I keep coming back to it. I keep using the words through it so that I stay on track and my argument stays clear and coherent. As a deconstructionist reading places John Savage as subordinate, again using my words that I used in the beginning, it forces the audience to align with either the precept societies, the world state, or male pay, or to align with subordinate John Savage. Arguably, again, see, I'm using those linking words again. It is a choice between the civilized community identity stability, another quote, or the natural and wild beastly savages, or the man of both worlds and of neither. Okay, now we get to our interpret. What are the themes that are coming out? What's the meaning for all of us here? So then I carry on. So I've had the audience positioning up in this paragraph up here, and I'm going to carry that through here. Savage is positioned then as both belonging to both worlds and not belonging to either. He's both homogenous and other. Through a deconstructed reading, he becomes, so again, chiming my words from earlier. He becomes the embodiment of Huxley's conflict. So here, I'm focusing now on the themes. He becomes the embodiment of Huxley's conflict between nature and technology, born of the technological world, yet trying to reside in the natural world. So now I'm moving into my themes. Now, critical analyze is asking me explain the how and why of the positives and negatives. Now, this is really important too, because again, this is the how. So you have to get to this state in your alarm to be able to answer a question like the one you've got that you've been given. These are the how components. The how needs you to do both analysis and critical analysis. And you'll see it's asking you, what's the purpose? What's the purpose and who's the audience and what's the context? So here, arguably, Huxley is presenting two utopian societies, yet when a deconstructed reading, so again, chiming, bringing it back to the lens that I'm talking about, it's always present, always present. Yet when a deconstructed reading is taken and the cultural assumptions of the dominant is challenged, again, that's a word that I used earlier, it suggests that both these utopian societies are problematic. It can be argued, again, linking words there, that Huxley is criticising both the technological advancements of his own society and the dawn of the assembly line, as well as criticising the traditionalists of his time that rejected technological advancement. So this is my context. I brought in the Ford assembly lines. I brought in that conflict in society between the traditionalists who wanted to stick to the old ways and those who were pro-technology, which links nicely to what I've got here in interpret. Okay, then it goes on to my evaluate. And this is the to what extent part is how successful is it, which is really important as well, because the question is how are the ideas explored, and one of the things is which one explores it better than the other, this comparison and contrast. So ultimately a deconstructed reading challenges the cultural assumption of both societies. So again, you'll notice I'm using those words that I used earlier and challenges here as well. Now, what I do wrong here is I bring in more evidence, which is really not good. But as I said, this is a first draft. So this is most evident in John's suicide. His suicide is neither the bloodied sacrifice he wanted to be for the male pay, nor the homicide desired by Fordian occupants. He is not the homogenous community member of either society. Thus, a deconstructed reading ultimately suggests that a heterogeneous individual that embraces both nature and technology is Huxley's true ideal. So that's what I think that through a deconstructed reading is what Huxley is trying to tell us. So I would then have to, this would ultimately become two paragraphs because there's a lot there for one paragraph. I would restructure it so I would probably have a paragraph about the suicide, which I've brought in here, and explore that in more detail and actually get some more evidence in there. This is just my alarm template to actually start to work out what it is I'm going to say when answering the question. You need to go through a planning process and a scaffolding process to be able to do it. I hope that helps what you are after. I've done podcasts previously on alarm and on T sentences, so I'll upload those for you as well. Good luck.